Okay, so now we've talked about quite a bit, and we can answer one of the central questions in immunology, which is how does the immune system actually know what to attack? And this segment ties together antigen presentation, major histocompatibility complexes, helper and killer T cells, and the reason that natural killer cells matter so much in viral defense. So let's take a look. Now, there are two major classes of MHC, or major histocompatibility complexes, and this is where the functional split between CD8 and CD4 T cells becomes important. So, cells that recognize MHC1 as the presented antigen better become CD8 cells. Cells that recognize MHC2, they become CD4 cells. So let's talk about the difference between the two. So there's two types, and recognition preference helps to determine the T lymphocytes which develop. Now, CD8 cells are the killers. If a cell presents a foreign peptide on MHC1, CD8 cells read that as, hey, big sign, there is something abnormal inside of me. And that's especially important for viral infection because viruses replicate inside host cells. CD8 cells trigger the infected cell to die. So to say that another way, when CD8 cells encounter a cell that is presenting a matching antigen on MHC1, in other words, receptors on its cell surface, it's saying, hey, something foreign inside of me, these cells will kill it. Almost all cells have MHC1 molecules on their surface, which means they should be able to present self-antigen or present a big flashing sign that says something foreign is inside of me. Now, CD4 cells, these are the helpers. They produce cytokines that strengthen and coordinate the work of many other immune cells. Now, without functional CD4 cells, humans become profoundly vulnerable to infection and cancer. So this is why HIV is so devastating over time, because it targets and depletes CD4 cells. So this slide reminds us about some of the regulatory T cells. In green text, you see it says Treg cells. Well, these cells help put the brakes on immune activity. They regulate immune activity. In autoimmune disease, poor regulation can be part of the problem. So even here, the theme of balance and control keeps showing up because Treg cells help blunt the immune effects. And in the case of deficiency of Treg function or poor regulation of Treg, this is implicated in autoimmune disease. So, as a reminder, we have two different types of T cells that may be differentiated into. That's CD8 and CD4. And again, those are depending on the MHC1 or MHC2. So we previously heard about natural killer cells, and now we can return to natural killer cells with better context. So earlier I told you that the NK cells kill cells that fail to express MHC1 appropriately. And now that should make more sense because healthy cells normally show MHC1 on their surface. In other words, the sign says, hey, self-antigen, I'm cool, don't attack me. I am you, right? I'm self. And that helps signal that they are part of the body and behaving normally. In the case where we have pathogens, some pathogens, especially certain viruses, they've evolved ways to interfere with MHC expression. So infected cells are harder for CD8 cells to detect. And that kind of seems clever from the pathogen's perspective, but the immune system has a countermeasure. So NK cells, they are biased to eliminate cells that are not showing the expected MHC1 signals. So there's an elegant defense logic here. If a cell shows suspicious internal antigen on MHC1, well, it says, hey, something foreign's inside of me. CD8 cells can attack it. However, if a cell tries to hide by not displaying MHC1 properly, in other words, the infected cell, that internal virus says, don't hold up our sign. Well, If a cell tries to hide by not displaying the MHC1 properly, these natural killer cells can attack it instead. Either way, the immune system has a way to respond. So again, what we see is normal body cells. They're showing the sign on the MHC1 that says, hey, I'm self-antigen, I'm cool, don't attack. Pathogens may display, hey, there's a foreign pathogen inside of me, so now we have a very clear, hey, we need to kill this cell, or the infected cell doesn't want to present the foreign antigens, and so it hides. Well, the immune countermeasure, again, is to make sure that we provide adequate opportunity to kill the infected cell, even if it's trying to hide. Okay, so this slide starts to create a clearer distinction between CD4 and CD8 responses. So let's try to break this down. CD8 lymphocytes are especially good at dealing with cytoplasmic antigens, and that fits viral infections. So because viruses tend to hijack a host cell, they replicate inside the cell. This means that once the viral proteins are processed and presented on MHC1, it's in other words presenting I'm foreign, I don't belong here, then the CD8 cells can recognize and kill the infected cell. So CD8 cells are the killers. Now, in contrast, CD4 cells. The CD4 lymphocytes are more involved with helping other immune cells, especially in situations where antigen is being handled in vesicles or it's presented in helper pathways. So there's some specialized subsets of CD4 cells, and some of those are strongly involved in allergic reactions. But let's kind of look at it from this perspective. CD4 lymphocytes activate macrophages and phagocytes to kind of gobble up and clean up the area. And they also have an ability to recognize antigens in vesicles, and they're primarily involved with activating cytokines to help identify where maybe the B cells need to go. So cytokines kind of like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs saying, hey, the problem's over here. And CD4 is the helper to kind of wave the arms in the air and point the B cells or the CD8 cells to the area that needs to be killed or resolved from the pathogen. Now, one more important point is memory. And T cells proliferate during an adaptive response, but not all of them become short-lived effector cells. Some become memory cells. So that means the next time the same pathogen appears, the body can actually respond more quickly and more effectively. So adaptive immunity is not just about fighting the current infection, but it's also about building future readiness, being able to mount the response in a much quicker manner to start to fight the infection. Now, once activated, T lymphocytes are going to circulate through the body, and they're going to look for antigens that match their receptors. So cytokine gradients help guide them toward tissue sites where they're needed. And they can leave the bloodstream, enter tissues, and carry out what we call effector functions. So this is really helpful, and this slide enforces the important clinical point that many symptoms of illness actually come from the immune activity. So when the body, quote unquote, gets sick, yes, there's pathogen present, but sometimes the symptoms that we're experiencing are the mounting of that defense. So fever, malaise, lymph node swelling, soreness, that overall rundown feeling, that's often not caused directly by the pathogen alone, but it might be strongly shaped by cytokines and the immune cell behavior. In other words, how we're trying to fight the infection. So when a patient says to you, I feel awful, well, part of what they're experiencing is the immune system doing its job. The immune response is essential, but it's not always comfortable. So that's another reason that immunology matters clinically. The very mechanisms that protect us can also kind of explain why sometimes patients feel a little bit crummy during the disease. So the major takeaway here is that immune recognition depends on presentation and context. And we've talked about MHC molecule display antigen, and we discussed CD8 cells, which kill infected cells. We discussed how CD4 cells are coordinating a response. And we also talked about how your NK cells, or natural killer cells, provide backup when abnormal cells fail to show the right self signals, and therefore we can avoid, hopefully, having autoimmune response by cells that are either hiding or strongly binding. So in this case, the CD8 cells, their primary function is to kill and poke holes in cells. Cytokines are what are kind of giving you the symptoms. The lymph nodes are swollen. It's the social gathering place, right? All the cells are meeting and proliferating. Cytokines are produced. So if you feel run down from a fever or flu, well, it might actually be cytokines. And let's not forget about immune teamwork. We know that T lymphocytes and innate immune cells, they often work together. And that happens, as we mentioned, with cytokine messaging. So make no mistake, the body is always working hard to keep you healthy. But when you do feel crummy, just know that the body is trying to mount a defense, and we're hopefully going to feel better in a couple of days.